Welcome back to our Clean Architecture in Flutter series. In the last episode, we built our remote data source. Today, we'll look at models and entities. Models turn raw data, like JSON, into Dart objects, and entities represent the clean business objects that the domain and presentation layers actually use. Okay, let's start. If we go into the GNews dashboard, here we can call the top headlines API. This is the JSON it returns. We get an object that looks like this. Total article is a number and articles a list of article objects. So we found two objects until now. An article object and a whole response object. Whole response object has two fields, total articles and articles. And articles have fields like ID, title, description, content, URL, image, published at, language, and source. Notice that source is its own object with multiple fields. That means in our model layer, we'll create a separate class for it. So it is our third object. Let's jump into our project and create these three models. Let's add our first model, a news feature, inside data layer and inside models folder. Now, instead of writing everything manually, let me show you a plugin that makes this process much faster. Of course, you can always write models by hand, but for the sake of speeding up this course, I'll use a plugin called JSON to Dart. You can install it in Android Studio or VS Code, and you're free to use any similar plugin you like. I'll go ahead and install it. And when I come back, you'll see a new menu option called JSON to Dart is added. Okay, you can see this option added here. Now we paste in the simple JSON we copied from the GNews API. In the setting, I'll keep null safety and comments enabled. There is also an option for generate inner classes. If we tick this, the plugin will automatically generate models for the nested objects like article and source. Here add a file name for your model. For example, news response model. And now the model is created. You'll notice it comes with two methods, from JSON and to JSON. Since we're only using these models to read data from the API, we don't need to JSON right now. So I'll remove it. We can always add it back later if we decide to cache data locally. If we scroll down, you'll also see that after news response model class, the plugin generated inner classes for article and source. I'll remove their two JSON methods also. And then I'll move those into their own separate files. And now let's fix the necessary imports. Now that we generated our models, the next step is to connect them with the domain layer. Remember, in clean architecture, the domain layer should only know about business objects, not JSON parsing or API details. That's why we create entities. Now inside the domain layer of our feature, inside entities folder, we create our entities with the similar names. The first one, news response entity. Second one, article entity. And the last one, source entity. Let's start with news response entity. At first, I just copied the same variables from news response model and make them final. Now we create the constructor similar to what we had in the model. I'll just copy the same fields here. Here I want extends from Equatable. Now let's talk about it. In Dart, by default, two objects are considered equal if they are the exact same instance in memory. But in most apps, we want to compare objects by their values, not by memory reference. That's where Equatable comes in. Now two article entity instances with the same data are considered equal, even if they are different instances. This is super handy in BLoC states. For example, if the new state has the same data as the previous one, the UI won't rebuild unnecessarily. Equatable also checks the runtime type. So two different classes are never considered equal, even if all their fields are identical. So in our setup, our models extends entities, that we talk about it later, and the entities extends Equatable. This gives us value equality automatically for all our business objects, which makes state management much safer and predictable. Now let's install Equatable package by Flutter pub add Equatable command. Now you can see when we extend from Equatable, we need to override props. Props is a getter that returns a list of all the fields you want Equatable to use when checking equality. Dart looks at the values in this list to decide if two objects are equal or not. I put all the fields in this list. Now let's do the same for article entity. I copy the same variables. Now we need to create the constructor. The same as news response, I copy the fields from model. Let's put all the variable names inside props so that all their values are considered during comparison. Now it's the source entity turn. Now we want to come back to the models and extend from entities. Before that, let's review some differences between entities and models. Entities live in the domain layer, represents the core business objects of the app. Are pure Dart objects. They don't know anything about JSON, APIs, or database formats. Usually immutable, so their data cannot change unexpectedly. But the models live in the data layer, represents the structure of raw data from an API or database, can include parsing logics, examples from JSON or to JSON, often extend entities to reuse the same fields and maintain consistency with the domain layer. In summary, models take the raw data from the API or database and turn it into dark objects. But the entities use that data and provide a clean, consistent structure to the domain and presentation layers. In other words, models speak API and entities speak the language of our app. Okay, so why we want to extend from entities? The reason we extend entities in our models is simple. It's the easiest way to immediately pass the data from the model to the entity without creating a separate object manually. As we continue, you'll better understand why this pattern is so useful and how it helps keep our domain layer clean. Okay, let's do it. Since our model and entity share the same fields, we can use super in the model constructor instead of this. This way, the values are automatically assigned to both the model and the entity. Also, we can remove the fields from the model entirely and keep them only in the entity, which avoids duplication and keeps our code cleaner. Now I do the same for the other models. I also rename the article to article model. I also rename the source to source model. Let's replace this with super. Now let's remove the fields from the models and keep them only in the entities. Now we want to implement our from.json method to return an instance of our model. We make it a factory constructor. So what is a factory in Dart? A factory constructor is a special type of constructor that can return an existing instance, perform some logic before creating the object, or even return a different subclass. We use it here because parsing JSON might fail or require pre-processing, and a factory gives us the flexibility to handle nulls, defaults, or nested objects before actually creating the model instance. In short, from.json as a factory safely converts raw JSON into a usable model object. Now we're going to comment out the from.json content and manually create an instance of our model. Okay, now we don't need this comment part. We have a warning here. I add a const to fix it. Now let's do the same for other models. We also copy the part of the code that creates the list of articles. Here, we define the type of the variable list of article models. The variable should be outside the if block. Now you can see we have a warning. The reason is that our variable should be declared as final. Once we change it to final, the warning disappears. The last thing is that I forgot to change something. We should never use models inside entities, so I replace article model with article entity. Otherwise, the domain layer would depend on the data layer. which breaks clean architecture rules. Let's check other entities. Okay, here also I replace source model to source entity. That's it for this lesson. Today we learned about models and entities and how they work together in clean architecture. See you in the next one.